Oxford for Europe has been campaigning since 2016 to stop Brexit, to remain in the EU. But tonight is a different event. We're not campaigning at all tonight. We want to celebrate the EU. When we started to plan for this event, we thought we might not be in the EU anymore, so it might have been more of a eulogy for all that we'd lost. But we're still in, so that's good. It's not campaigning, we're not political tonight. Our distinguished speakers on the platform, and we have some also seated in the audience, will be giving you clear facts about why the EU is so valuable and how good it's been for the UK and for Europe. We hope you're going to leave here tonight understanding how much has been achieved and how much will be lost should the UK finally leave the great European project. In a moment, our chair, Peter Burke, will introduce our speakers. But first, I call on Councillor Craig Simmons, Sheriff of Oxford in a very fancy chain, and shortly to be Lord Mayor, to welcome you all to the Town Hall.
Thank you very much. Welcome to your Town Hall. This is your Town Hall. And as has been said, I'm the Sheriff of Oxford. In a couple of weeks I'll be the Lord Mayor of Oxford. And as a Lord Mayor, one of my themes is international relations, and I'll be working with Asylum Welcome to continue to support them as a charity and making sure that Oxford, whatever, remains a welcoming city. So welcome to your town hall. I'm sure many of you are busy in local elections, in European elections now, and campaigns, so it's great that we've got such a good turnout tonight and we'll hear such interesting speakers. I think my own views on the EU are well known. You know, as a councillor, I've been involved in Oxford Stays since the very beginning, which became Oxford for Europe, and proposed many motions supporting our EU membership at the council. But I'm here to represent the council as a whole, and I'm glad to say in all those motions that were proposed, supporting the second referendum, supporting membership of the EU, supporting continued rights for citizens of the EU, the council was unanimous, or almost unanimous, in supporting those. So you have a very supportive council behind you, and that's why it's a particular pleasure to welcome you all here to your town hall. So have a great evening. I'm sure you'll learn a lot. There's certainly a lot to celebrate, and so I'm sure we'll hear a lot. And hopefully it'll also energise you for the weeks ahead. So this is not about the election, it's about energising, it's about recognising what we could lose. And so I'm sure you'll all get active and involved. So thank you very much for coming here, and have a great evening.
Just by way of brief introduction to Europe, I wanted to say thanks very much indeed to Craig, and I think we'll tribute to the Council for their support and for hosting us here at this August venue. And I want to just mention also the Council has been actually very good in its approach towards the issue of Europe and European citizens, and they've hosted a number of meetings. For those of you who are other EU countries may be interested. I'll come back to that later, but just to really say thank you for your support. I wanted to introduce this meeting by saying, first of all, two words about Oxford for Europe. We are an organisation which has grown and grown since the referendum. I think there is very strong feeling in many parts of the country, but possibly in many places as much as in Oxford, which has been 70% Remain. And that has been, for us, encouraging. We're always open to members, and if you talk to our members over there at the desk later on, you can certainly join up, give your name and email address and so on, and we'll put you on our second issues. So we're an optimistic organisation. We believe in celebrating Europe, and that's what this evening's meeting is about. I would emphasise this meeting was planned back in March, and at that time we had no idea how things would shape up. We didn't know with any certainty that there would be European elections, and so I'd emphasise above all that this meeting has not any political affiliation. We're an apolitical organisation. We have members of every party, with the possible exception of UKIP and the Brexit Party. But all the other parties, I think, are represented among our membership. And I'd emphasise that speakers are speaking in their capacity as experts on Europe rather than in any political way. And therefore, there's no party political propaganda or leaflets or whatever here. That's just an important point to make. In the spirit of being apolitical, just to say a very brief word about where we are. I think we're 1 month into the hiatus between two artificial deadlines. The second and third deadline, we don't know how many more there will be. Maybe that Halloween will see the end of this process, but watch this space. The other thing I will say is that this is an opportunity for us to actually cultivate our fellow citizens and to bring home to them the importance of being European. We will always be European, we can't change that, but the fact that we recognise it and are proud of it is important. And I think most people here will sign up to that. Today's news, in case some of you haven't heard the news, and I'll say this because it's not a political meeting, I will say it without comment and without any change in facial expression. The Labour Party policy has not changed. Labour are still committed to the idea of a people's vote as one of several options. I'll leave it at that. I'm sure that will be something which will be discussed later on during questions. Having said that, our three speakers will be the following order: Professor Tony Garton, Professor Sarah Harper, and Pastor Deirdre, MEP. I just want to say a few very quick words about our first speaker, Tony Garton. So I think it could be said that the term public intellectual was designed for him. He's somebody who has been exceptional in combining success both in academia and also in journalism. He's Professor of European Studies at Oxford and is recognised, I think, worldwide as one of the foremost experts on the contemporary politics of Central and Eastern Europe. That was, I think, exemplified in the fact that he did some of his postgraduate work in East Berlin when there was such a place. And one of his publications was based on his 300-page plus Stasi file, and I gather makes fascinating reading. Of his many other publications, the most recent is entitled Free Speech, 10 Principles for a Connected World. He may correct me because he's so prolific that this is last week's news and may already be out of date. He is distinguished by having received awards from many overseas governments. For his journalism, he's been a recipient of the Orwell Prize, and very significantly in 2017 was the recipient of the Charlemagne Prize, which I think reflects his work on bringing together people from many parts of Europe. He was listed in 2005 in Time magazine as one of the world's 100 most influential people. But that was 14 years ago, before he became quite as distinguished as he is now. Quotation shelves are where most works of history spend their lives. But the kind of history Garton writes is more likely to lie on the desks of the world's decision makers. So I need to say no more than that. I'll hand over to Professor Garton. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Now you can hear me, I hope. Good evening, Oxford for Europe. It's fantastic to see so many of you here. When people are introducing themselves at events, where are you from these days, I tend to say Oxford, Europe. Because of course Oxford could no more be removed from Europe than Carfax could be removed from Oxford. It always has been and always will be a great European city. But our subject today is the political community of Europe, and not just the continent, the cultural and historical entity. Let me start by telling a story which relates to a book I'm just working on, which is a kind of personal history of contemporary Europe. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a small village in northern Germany, which my father's gun troop had occupied at the end of the Second World War, 1945, 1946. And all I had from that period was a couple of grainy photographs showing British officers watching cricket in this village. What could be more normal than watching cricket, except actually a cricket game in June 1945 in the middle of Germany was not so usual. And I thought I'll try and find out what people remember from that time. And I was absolutely amazed. I got there, and they pulled together about 15 people, all of whom had the most vivid memories of the end of the Second World War. They remembered what they called Der Engländer, Der Tommy, they called them Tommy, coming over the river. They remembered the 30, 18 and 19-year-old German sailors who had been sent to defend the eastern bank of the river, and had most of them died and buried in the cemetery. They remembered the forced laborers from Russia and Poland who'd been working in the chemical weapons factory just nearby, and who now came to plunder the farmhouses to take their revenge. They remembered the German expellees from Silesia and East Prussia, who'd come on an endless trek, thousands of miles on foot and on a horse-drawn cart, and were quartered on them. They remembered the British officer who had arrived in their house, and the first thing these British officers said was, "You'll never guess." The first thing they said was, "Could we make a cup of tea?" So they made a cup of tea. And this elderly woman was telling me, and we were standing out on the terrace looking over the river, and this elegant British officer was just standing there with his cup of tea. And then there was a shot, and the cup of tea fell to the ground, and he fell to the ground. And he was killed. He'd been killed by a sniper, a German sniper. So they remembered, here were people who remembered everything about that period. In their minds it was completely present. And I tell you this to make two points. First of all, it was those personal memories of war, occupation, Holocaust, Gulag, fascist dictatorship in Spain or Germany, communist dictatorship in Eastern Europe, which drove 3 generations forward to make the European Union we have today. And secondly, if you had told the people in that village 74 years ago, in May 1945, that we have the Europe we have today, they would not have believed it. A Europe in which Germany, a liberal democracy, peacefully united, albeit in new frontiers, has neighbours that are liberal democracies to east and west, south and north, all these countries united in the same political, economic, legal and security communities. And what is more, you can wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday and decide you want to fly to the other end of the continent, jump in Ryanair, or if you're lucky, EasyJet, fly to the other end of the continent, meet someone, settle down, get a job there, study, work, live and love, from one end of the continent to the other, and you will be in a liberal democracy, one and the same communities. There has never been a Europe remotely like this. It is without question the best Europe we have ever had in European history, bar none, full stop. So there's a lot to celebrate. But this extraordinary achievement is now under existential threat. And not just from Brexit. Brexit is just one aspect of a much wider European crisis. So it's dramatic because it's one of the largest member states actually deciding to leave. Incidentally, a side effect of Brexit has been that countries like Poland and Denmark, which were vaguely contemplating the idea of possibly doing Polexit or Danexit or Hungexit or Czechsit, have now decided it's a very bad idea. And support for leaving the European Union in all these countries has gone down. But Brexit, which many people even on the continent think about as a kind of sort of English eccentricity, is actually not. In many respects, it's just one symptom of a shared European crisis. Yes, there's the recent moderation. Yes, there's a peculiar English obsession with strictly legal sovereignty, which I think goes back all the way to the 1533 Act in Restraint of Appeals to Rome. Strictly formal legal sovereignty, I emphasize, not effective sovereignty. Yes, there's a very respectable concern about democratic self-government, but most of the causes of Brexit are common European causes. What are the other dimensions of that crisis? Well, for starters, for the first time since the end of the Second World War, we have seen one European country simply seizing, annexing by force part of the territory of another European country, Crimea. So don't tell me we have a Europe entirely at peace. There's still a war raging in eastern Ukraine. In Hungary, you have a leader who has demolished liberal democracy, already demolished liberal democracy, with the aid of EU subsidies, using EU money to demolish liberal democracy, and conducting a dog-whistle anti-Semitic campaign against George Soros. In Poland, you have a party which wants to follow the Hungarian example. In many parts of southern Europe, you still have the really deep negative after effects of the Eurozone crisis, which have not been overcome and which saw youth unemployment soaring up to close to 50%, so that people who had doctorates from a Spanish university had to come and work as waiters in restaurants in Oxford. I never forget meeting one of them, a lad called Julio in Al-Andalus. Anyone been to Al-Andalus in a little town in the street? Well, there was this guy with 3 degrees working as a waiter there. And that crisis has not been overcome. The Spanish election result is a good sign, an encouraging sign, but a far-right party that hankers back to the good old days of Generalissimo Franco got 10% of the vote. 1 in 10 votes, so don't have to be too self-confident. In many other parts of the continent, you have nationalist populist movements which are still gathering a large part of the vote. Even in famously social democratic Scandinavia, in the recent Finnish election, the so-called the Finns, previously the true Finns, as opposed to false Finns, who were of different colour or religion or ethnicity, got just a whisker less of the vote than the Social Democrats, 17.5%, large share. In France, at the moment in the opinion polling for the European elections, Le Pen's Rassemblement National is neck and neck with Macron's pro-European En Marche. So wherever you look, and then this is not to mention Trump's America turning away from Europe, leaving us to rely on ourselves for our security. It's not to mention the climate change emergency or many other problems. So that from all sides, not just from Brexit, the achievement, the great historical achievement of the European Union is under existential threat and needs people to come to its defense, including, very importantly, those who I call the 89ers. People born between, say, 1980 and 2000, today between 20 and 40, right? So previous generations, including, I think, looking out many people in this room, remember, if not the Second World War, the Cold War, probably know a country or two which had until quite recent times a dictatorship. If you're an 89er, someone of that generation, you have known nothing but this Europe virtually whole and free, composed of liberal democracies where you could travel from one end to the other without let or hindrance, settle down, get a job, study or work. And there is one of the problems of Europe at the moment is it has both the problems of failure and the problems of success. So we're paying the price for many of the failures of European policy over the last 30 years, like the structural problems of the Eurozone, or the great inequality that followed the spread of globalized financial capitalism and was worsened after the Eurozone crisis and the financial crisis. But we also have a problem of success, that there are many, many people, particularly from the generation of the 89ers, who do not really believe in their bones that all these achievements are under threat and that they could unravel very, very quickly. So actually the murder of Lyra McKee speaks for a larger phenomenon. It's not until someone is actually, an innocent young woman is actually murdered on the streets that people wake up to how critical the situation is. And I think a lot of people are still not woken up. And this brings me, and this is my last point, while remaining strictly non-political, as we all have sworn to be, to the European elections. So the European elections have become unusually important. Normally, if you ask party activists, European elections are not about Europe. They're fought on local issues by local parties, and people vote on local issues. This time, all over Europe, for once and at last, the European elections really are about Europe, and they really matter. And across the whole continent, as in this country, it's really about the future of Europe. The Electoral Commission in this country recently tweeted the following figure. 1 in 3 people between the age of 18 and 34 is not registered to vote. 1 in 3. So my age and ours, including many of our students. So the one thing we certainly have to do, and we have just a week and a day to do it, is to make sure that anyone who hasn't registered does register. I've just actually given a prize for a competition between the colleges of Oxford University as to who can register the most students to vote. Modest prize. We have to get them registered. We have to register ourselves if we're not registered. Of course, Irish citizens and, oh irony of ironies, Commonwealth citizens resident here can vote anyway. So if you know any friendly New Zealanders, get them to turn out for the European elections. Crucially also, British citizens living in the other 27 countries of the EU can vote here if they haven't lived abroad for longer than 15 years, but they have to go through quite a process to do it, which maybe Catherine will say more about. They have to actually get in touch with their local electoral registration office. And then there are the 3 million plus citizens of other EU countries who live here. And they are all entitled to vote as European citizens, and most of them are not registered to vote. And they not only have to register to vote, they also then have to fill in a form that is online, which says I'm not going to vote in my home country, and physically or perhaps by email get it to the electoral registration office. In my view, this is a scandalously anachronistic and obstructive process. In an age when we pay our bills online, why you can't register online, I do not know, or maybe I do know, I have my suspicions. Strictly non-political suspicions, of course. But if you know any EU citizens living here, friends, neighbours, please get them to go through that rather irksome process, because it really matters of the turnout. And now I'm going to say my final and really not party political thing, which is this. If you were, like me, someone who believes passionately we need a second referendum in order that Britain will vote to remain in the European Union, Then you would look at the parties, you would, as Peter said, be really worried by the still absurdly fudge-like fence-sitting position of the Labour Party, now reinforced by the NEC, and you would see 5 parties which are unambiguously pro-Remain and pro-second referendum. Lib Dems, Change UK, Greens, SNP, Plaid Cymru, and you would, if you were this hypothetical person, talking not at all party politically, you would vote for one of those parties to send the message. Now, as you all know, there is a real problem with the PR system which prevails in the European elections. Maybe Catherine will say more about it, which is that under the de Hond method, it punishes small parties in the regions for the European elections. So we have a big problem if the vote is divided between the parties. There's not a great deal we can do about that now, but think about it as a second referendum. Think about it as a pre-referendum, and say what really matters is the turnout and the vote. Who votes for pro-Remain, pro-referendum parties, and who doesn't. And that tells you just how important that is. That is what this hypothetical party political person would tell you. In the immortal words of the House of Cards, I couldn't possibly comment. But what I would say is that these European elections matter more than any in the last 40 years. There's a huge achievement in the European Union. It is the best Europe we've ever had, but it's under attack from all sides, and it needs us to get out there and defend it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Timothy. That was superb, learned, and moving, and very much, as we know, you can speak and speak from the heart. Can I just, questions will be later, I'm sure you have plenty of questions and there will be plenty of opportunity to ask them. But just to comment on behalf of Oxford for Europe, I'm very glad you mentioned the question of electoral registration, and this is crucial. We have actually written to the heads of the common rooms of all the colleges, because that seemed to be the best conduit to the students. It does appear that there's a bar on education institutions actually taking active steps to encourage people to vote. And that I think is most unfortunate. There may be others who can speak more about that, but we are doing what we can. And those of you who are interested and want to register, or have friends who want to register as European nationals to vote, there'll be information on the side over there for you. So please do feel free to ask. So that was all I was going to say about that. Just parenthetically, to mention that we do welcome people tweeting. Those of you who are on Twitter, we won't be in a position to deal with any tweets this evening, but they'll be out there in the Twitter sphere. And we have got our own Twitter label, which is @OxfordStays. And I propose that we should use a hashtag as well. And could I propose that those who want to tweet to a hashtag, you can use hashtag OFE Town Hall, all one word. For the want of anything better, I think that would be unique, and you can use that, and then you can share any thoughts with other people in the room who are tweeting at the same time. I hope that works. I don't know whether it will or not. Others can advise me better than I about that. So the next part of the evening is to introduce Professor Harper. And again, like Timothy Garton, Sarah Harper is a polymath whose work spans both academia and journalism and many other spheres. And I think if I were to read out all her distinctions this evening, we'd still be here for breakfast tomorrow morning. But suffice to say that she's by background an anthropologist. She is also a gerontologist, which is somebody who studies the science of aging, and a demographer. And she's published very widely in those areas. As Professor of Gerontology at Oxford University, she's also the founding director of the Oxford Institute of Population and Aging, about which maybe she can tell you a little bit more. She's also an advisor both to the UK government and many foreign governments on questions of democracy and population movement, and is on the Prime Minister's Council for Science and technology. And on top of all that, she has been involved both in print and television journalism. She has many distinctions, including CBE, for her wide-ranging work. And with that, I will hand over to Sarah.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this meeting. And I have to say that I didn't actually know you existed till I met Peter, and once I learned about you, and then he said, would I come and speak? I thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to actually look at some facts and figures. And so Peter said, would I talk about the evidence about the population of Europe and the population of the UK and how it's going to change should Brexit come through. And I was very touched by something that Timothy said right at the beginning about how he described himself. And I have just been working in Paris for the last year. And for the very first time in my life, when people ask me what passport I have, I say I have a European passport. I think that's actually very much backed up by survey material, which shows that there are now far more people in the UK who identify as European than ever before. So if it should be that Brexit didn't happen, then I think we're all aware that both statistically and probably emotionally, our involvement in Europe should increase quite dramatically. So I'm a demographer, and I look at falling fertility rates across the world, falling mortality rates across the world, which means we're all living longer, but also as the balancing act between births and deaths, and that's actually migration. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the role of migration and how Britain came into being. I think there's a real tension at the moment, and it's been a very positive tension for the last 40 years. In particular, as we stood on that balance between being members of a big Commonwealth of nations, that was the Commonwealth, and increasingly our regional group of nations. And I think it was a very successful balance, and we did identify as a nation globally with our Commonwealth and regionally with Europe. And obviously in the past few years that emphasis has been changed for us, really without many people wanting that. If we just go back and look at what happened to the UK, we know there have been these waves of migration into the UK. So basically, for about 1,000 years, we were formed by the Romans, by the Vikings, by the Saxons, and then by the Normans. And I think there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence from looking at our culture and names as to how mixed we were with our European neighbours. If I just look at my own surnames, if I take my grandparents' surnames, they are Harper, Clare, Scott and Endersby. But I'm completely English. I can trace on both sides of my family back about 400 or 500 years. And yet, Harper and Clare are Norman names, Scott is presumably Scottish, and Endersby is actually Endersbu, and it is Danish. And really interestingly, the Danish family has stayed within some settlements outside Cambridge since 1485, and we have a direct line. So I'm completely English, but I'm also very European. And I don't know whether you went to that wonderful exhibition on the Ashmolean, which looked at migrants and settlements. If you didn't, just go onto the web and Google. I think it's called Settlements, Geography and Genes. And for the very first time, they have mapped the UK genome, and they can really show genetically where we come from, and it's absolutely fascinating. The English are genetically actually very different from the Scots and the Welsh, and actually also from the Cornish, which is interesting. But if you look at the Scottish population, quite a large percentage of the Scottish genome is Norwegian, and that's the Viking influx. If you look at the English genome, a large percentage, relatively, of our genome is actually German, and that comes from the Saxon. But across the UK, we all have quite a large percentage of genetic material from France. So genetically, we really are linked into our region, and we've got the evidence now to show that. And that's because we've always had some kind of a migration. And in fact, international migration has been at roughly 3% of our population for many centuries now. We've tended to send people out, but we've also obviously having people come in. And we have very good data. We really now understand where our population, our migrant population has come from. And I just thought I would just go through where our migrant population has come from. And you may be surprised because it's actually slightly different from some of the public rhetoric that we've heard. If we look back 10 years ago, then overwhelmingly the majority of migrants as a group in this country are Indians. Roughly 700,000 of non-British born people are Indian, and that's exactly the same as the number of Poles we have. So 700,000 Indian-born Indians and Poles a decade ago. And then we had the Pakistanis and the Germans. They also were equal. We had as many French in this country as we did Kenyans. We had as many Bulgarians as Japanese. And we had as many Romanians as Canadians. So this idea that we have this massive influx of people from Eastern Europe, just statistically, isn't quite that accurate. Now, obviously, the Eastern Europeans increased coming into the country, but even at the time of the referendum, and 2016-2017 is where I will stop because things have got complex after that. Still, the biggest overseas-born group in this country was divided between the Indians and the Poles, then came the Pakistanis, then came the Irish, and interestingly, we have seen quite a decline in the German population. So we did have, not only culturally and socially, a wonderful balance between Europe and the Commonwealth, but also statistically in terms of the number of people that we had. So what do these migrants do? Why are they taking away our jobs, or why are they contributing to our society? Well, in 2016, again at the year of the referendum, half of all our processing in this country was done by non-British born peoples. So particularly food processing, but also manufacturing processing as well. A third of our hospitality and cleaning was done by immigrants, and a quarter of all our IT work, and remarkably our healthcare, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end, except in London, where 50% of all healthcare workers were non-British born. Huge contribution at all levels to our society. But if we actually just take the EU as opposed to migrants in general, one statistic I find quite extraordinary is that the number of managerial and professional people who came into this country, roughly 25% of EU migrants were managerial and professional, is very similar to British-born managerial and professional. That's roughly 30% of the British population. So we also benefited from very highly skilled immigrants when we look at our EU population. So what has happened since then? We've seen roughly a 70% decline in EU migrants coming in, and we've seen a 25% increase in non-EU migrants. So we have shifted our migrant population away from our region back to our Commonwealth. And that balance isn't necessarily good for the skills that we need in this country. And again, I'm going to talk in a minute about healthcare and skills and other things. Timothy talked quite a lot about young people, and I think this really is where looking forward is most concerning from a demographic point of view. In particular, there have been so many programs that have benefited British young people. Just to take one, the Erasmus program, 9 million Europeans, including a large number of British people who have been able to go overseas within Europe for their education. And many people are not aware of something called Erasmus Plus, which started in 2015, and nearly 3 million Europeans who work in apprenticeships and volunteering and the transition from education into work have all been able to benefit from this community. And I think what is very clear is when we look at the survey material, and you'll all be aware of this, many young people obviously not only want to stay, but when I look at my own undergraduates, what is particularly clear is before 2016, even the concept of a nation was being questioned by this generation. And that generation will begin to ask, why do we have boundaries based on the country in which we are born? We also increasingly know that we have actually mobile work, and indeed there was a big move about things like taxation, when we have so many people who are now working in the country of which they don't have their nationality. But the biggest thing, I think, is if we look at what is going to happen to the UK demographically. So the UK, along with other European countries, in fact all high-income countries, is ageing. We're ageing very quickly. We have fewer young people, a shrinking workforce, and an increasingly older population. But surprisingly, there are two countries within Europe that are particularly young, and they are the UK and France. And that is because they, in particular, have until now always encouraged young workers to come in, and they have kept themselves demographically young because of that. And I think, going back to my subject, gerontology, if we look at what is going to happen to the NHS and healthcare in general, at the very time when our population is ageing and we're having increasing numbers and percentages of older adults, we're dramatically reducing our healthcare workers, our doctors, our nurses, our home care workers. And going forward, we did some work which was published in the Garton just after the referendum. The reality for people in this country is, if Brexit stops the kind of freedom of movement that we have all experienced, then everybody, as they come up to retirement, are going to have to work 18 months longer simply to compensate from the decline in immigrants. So that's a very factual view of the population, but it's one that is actually based on evidence rather than rhetoric. Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic, and thank you for that. And I think it just exemplifies how many myths there are, which is our job to explode, and myths about population movement and the mantra ending free movement. I think above all we need to challenge whenever we hear them. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. We're very honoured to have Catherine Bearder here. I think I can say that Catherine Bearder is a committed Liberal Democrat. Other parties are available, but is a very senior member of the party, and is the one at present, the one Liberal Democrat MEP. She has a very distinguished career, and much of that actually was in Oxfordshire. She's been both district councillor in Charwell and county councillor, and she has worked her way up to her current status. She's been an MEP for the past 10 years and has been extremely active. I'm always absolutely astonished at her level of activity, and whenever I've had conversations with her, her staff, there are 4 or 5 balls in the air at the same time. But within the European Parliament, she'll tell you a bit more in a moment about what she does, but she's certainly been very distinguished in several areas. I think among others that come to mind are the environment, wildlife, gender equality, and of course British-European relations. And she is president of the Liberal Democrat European Group, and within the European Parliament, one of her important roles is chair of the Artistic Committee. Another is being a questor, and you'll see what is a questor. I hope we will learn more about that in a moment. So Catherine has come to talk in particular from the perspective of somebody who has worked in both Britain and Europe about the importance to us of maintaining good relationships with our European colleagues. Catherine.
Speaking as somebody who thought she would be retired on the 29th of March, yes, I'm having to work a bit longer, but that's a gleeful prospect, because it means that we are still full members, and we are still full members of the European Union, and for me that's wonderful. People often ask me when I say I'm an MEP, and they say, well, what on earth is an MEP? And then if they find out I'm a questor, they think I'm something out of Harry Potter. So I hope I have enough time to get round to that. I will talk a little bit about my work in the Parliament, because it is an illustration of what Timothy has been saying about how we come together and work together. And the European Union is a project. It's a project to deliver peace, to deliver trade, to deliver human rights, and latterly environmental protection, although that's not so firm in the treaties, but it is a fourth issue that is getting more traction. It's not perfect. Of course it's not perfect. There is no perfect system of governance, but it's a jolly sight better, as we've heard earlier, than the ones that we've had before, where we come together and we work out our problems in a grown-up, sensible way. And for me, the European Parliament illustrates that, and why it's such a joy for me to be working there, because we do come together. It's grown-up politics. It's a sort of politics that women are much more likely to be attracted to. We don't sit opposite each other and shout at each other. We sit together, we work together, and I'll give you an illustration of that in a little while. The foundation of the project is, of course, the single market, which is a British project. It was Mrs. Thatcher that wanted to bring that in, and the four principles of that are the free movement of labour, and that's what we've just heard about, the migration, the freedom to work, to live, to retire anywhere in the European Union, the movement of capital, and there is still some way to go on the free movement of capital, but we're getting there, of services and of goods. And services is very important. When you hear the Brexiteers talking about WTO, WTO does not cover services. So all of the services that come out of London and Norwich and Bournemouth and the industries that we have in services are really threatened by that. And so we have the three main institutions. There are others, but the three main institutions is the Council, where the government ministers and the heads of government sit and meet regularly. And then you have the Parliament, where the citizens directly elect through proportional representation, people like me who come and work together. We are your representatives. I don't represent my government. I don't represent my party. I sit in a political group, but I represent the citizens of the southeast of England and of the whole of the European Union. And that's not sure whether it was a cheer or what at the back. It is different from the other institutions. And then the final one, of course, is the Commission. Those unelected bureaucrats that Farage will have you think that are controlling our every move. The Commission are the council officers, if you like. They are the people who do the work that we instruct as politicians, both from the member states as well as from the Parliament. And the Commission is headed, each department in the Commission is headed by a representative from 28 of the member countries. And they have to come in front of the Parliament, and we interrogate them. It is an interrogation, it's 3-4 hours sometimes. And we, as the committees, will then decide if we will accept them as commissioners. And it has in the past. We have refused to have commissioners. Even in the last round, one lady was clearly, I don't know, the sister-in-law of the Bulgarian minister of something or other, and she had been sent off to Brussels to get rid of her, I think, and she clearly was not up to the job, and by the time she'd finished her interview, she had resigned. So they are nominated by elected governments, and they are scrutinised by your representatives in the Parliament. So never listen to the Brexiteers who say they're unelected, the people in the Commission, any more than they are, you elect your officers of your planning officers or your environmental health officers. So what we do, of course, most people know that we go to Strasbourg once a month, which is the most annoying. Anybody you know, unless they're French or live in Strasbourg, or maybe some of the Germans, but most people see it as crazy. That we have to go to Strasbourg when all our work is done in Brussels. We would change it if we could, but it's in the treaties. So we can't change the treaties. Only the council can do that, the heads of government. And that possibly might come up in the next treaty change, who knows. So we do our committee work in Brussels, and then the committees do the amending of legislation, or they respond to legislation that has come through from the agenda set by the governments. And then all the committees come together in Strasbourg and we vote on those. I did say I would just say a very quick word about being a quaestor. There are 5 quaestors in the Parliament elected by the MEPs to oversee the work of the Parliament services. So the restaurants in the Parliament, all the services that we might get, making sure that the place is warm and the roof doesn't leak, comes down to the quaestors. So we monitor all that. And as you said, one of my jobs is I'm in charge of the art collection, which is an amazing art collection. It's a contemporary collection of works. Some of it, being contemporary, is completely mad, and some of it is very beautiful. But it's a challenge that we have there, and we have to wait because since the financial crash we have no budget, so we have to wait for people to donate. And then it's a bit embarrassing if we say, no, we don't want it, it's not good enough. But it's a fascinating, for me, absolutely fascinating to be working on the inside of the Parliament and see how the machinery of the Parliament works, as well as being on the committee. I can see I'm very rapidly running out of time, but I wanted to give you an example of the cross-party work. When the new Commission came in 5 years ago, it was very clear that Juncker and his team hadn't got the first clue and didn't care about the environment. And as you've heard, I'm very much what got me into politics was my concern about what we're doing to the planet. And I realised that we needed to do something serious about wildlife crime, which is the 4th largest crime on the planet. So I pulled together a cross-party group. We have somebody from every group except Farage's group and the National Front. And we worked together cross-party. We say we worked with the Commission. We blooming well made sure that they came forward with an EU action plan on wildlife crime. It took some doing, but they've come forward with it. I was the author of the report that put it through to the Parliament, and we added stuff into that, and we demanded that there was money put into Europol. That was one big missing factor. And we managed to get the budget of Europol changed, so it now includes wildlife trafficking. So that action plan wouldn't have happened had the Parliament not been working cooperatively. Europol would not have the tools, and they can't work on things that are not in their budget and on their agenda. I'm also, as an MEP, a representative on the African, Caribbean and Pacific Joint Parliamentary Assembly. All the MEPs sit on overseas delegation, and I think the footprint of the European Union is not recognised in this country and how enormous it is worldwide. And I also took a report to the ACP, Joint Parliamentary Assemblies, where those countries welcomed action and work on wildlife crime. So taking it right from the Commission when they came in, right the way through and working cross-party collaboratively. We have managed in 117 countries, I think is in the ACP group and the European group, to change the attitude on wildlife. I haven't quite got that full ivory ban across the European Union, but who knows, in a few months' time I might manage to do that with a new Commission. But thank you, but that's a whistle-stop tour of my time in the European Parliament and how constructive it is and really what people will be doing, electing more of us MEPs. And if we can stop Brexit, then we can continue to do building bridges across Europe and building a much stronger and much more effective Parliament.
Wonderful presentation, wonderful timekeeping. And I just to add to that, in light of what Timothy said earlier, Yes, the electoral system for the European Parliament has its deficiencies. It's the whole system. Parties gaining less than 11% of the vote are very unlikely to elect any MEPs in any constituency. This one is the largest in the country. However, compared to Westminster, it is actually a very fair system because it's much more likely that your vote will count. I'm very mindful living in a constituency where and I won't name any particular political parties, but where the incumbent is unlikely to change anytime soon, that actually votes in Westminster in the vast majority of constituencies don't achieve change. In Europe they do, and that's another argument for voting. So having said that, I'd like to throw this open to the floor now. The usual data protection warning at this point, which is that all of this is being videoed, and if you ask a question, you'll be videoed by default, but you have the right to say that you don't wish for that to be used. Please approach one of our staff afterwards and we'll ensure that. So what I'm going to do is ask for questions 3 at a time, and then I will invite the speakers to decide which questions they want to answer. So I think there's a hand up there. If somebody has a microphone, perhaps near in the third row behind the gap. John.
Councillor John Tanner, I think we must have the most informed British electorate now about Europe than we ever had before as we enter these European elections, and I'm thrilled about that, and these elections are actually going to be about Europe. Do the panel members think we will actually ever leave the EU?
Who would like to comment on that?
Well, about 2 weeks after the referendum, Cecilia Malmström, who is the Swedish Commissioner for Trade, came into my office and she said, it'll never happen. There's no way we can do it. So I hang on to those words. I'm not sure might is squeaking. I think we can. I hang on to those words. I have to say, I didn't think. Is that better? I have to say, I didn't think we would still be there now, despite the fact that I've been saying to my group, don't write us off yet, we're not out yet. But even I didn't think that our government could be as incompetent as it is. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to be political. I think what it's highlighting is that the British system is a 19th century system trying to work in the 21st century. And we have a huge amount of power in the office of the Prime Minister. We have the most intransigent Prime Minister that is possible. Will we leave? I cannot see how we can do it. So I am continuing to fight to stop it any which way I can, because I know not just for me, not for you, but for our children and our grandchildren, we have to stay part of the European Union.
Well, first of all, on the British public being well informed, I think they're better informed, but not absolutely supremely well informed, I have to say. And by the way, on the Ivory Band, which I very much admire, I wish on that theme, someone could stop people on the BBC calling Donald Tusk Donald Tusk. You would think if we were being well informed about the EU, we could at least get his name right. Will we leave the EU? Not if I have anything to do with it. The first answer to that. Analytically, my answer would be, I still think, alas, it is more probable that at the end of the day, we will do that very English thing of finding what sounds like a sensible compromise, and we'll go for some sort of soft Brexit, which in an odd way is the worst of both worlds. because it is the most completely pointless Brexit. You have none of the putative advantages of Brexit, however delusional those may be, but you simply swap first-class membership for second-class membership. And that's what's my biggest fear, is that in this sort of, very English way, I say English advisedly, let's be reasonable and split the difference and find a reasonable compromise. That's what we'll do. However, I think the longer this mess goes on, and in that sense, we owe a huge vote of thanks to Theresa May. I mean, honestly, Romania should have a statue of Theresa May, just as people in Ukraine should have a statue of Vladimir Putin, because he's in a way the architect of Ukrainian statehood, and Theresa May is upping the chances of us remaining. The longer it goes on, the better the chances have become of getting to the best way out. I mean, that is to say, which is that Parliament makes a genuine compromise which says we will vote for Theresa May's deal on condition that we have a confirmatory referendum. And that then becomes a genuine choice between a real Brexit, a real existing Brexit which has actually been negotiated and agreed by all 27 other EU member states, and staying in the EU. And that's the referendum we want, and then I think we'd win it.
I'm going to invite you for the questions. If the floor mics are sorted, we deviated from our normal plan because we wanted to make sure the sound was all right. So I think the lady in the red is next, and then Alexandrine.
Hi, so I am one of the 3 million.
The sound control somewhere, sorry. You hold it further away, it probably won't echo so much.
So I am one of the 3 million EU citizens living in the UK, and there's more than 1 million British citizens living in the EU. We are true children of Europe. We based our life on the basic of freedom of movement. We were the subject most talked about. We were the subject most talked about during Brexit debate. We had no say, we still have no say, and we are still mostly talked about. We should never have been a subject of negotiation. We are bargaining chip while we are still being your family, friends, colleague, and we are true contributor to the society.
And I know you feel very passionate about something.
Yes.
And I think we all applaud that sentiment. Just
to let you, it's more to thank you for all the work you are doing to put us on the agenda.
Somebody over there near the back who asked a question back there. In the middle bench seat, yeah. Further over to your right. That's it, yeah.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Question, I think, possibly for Catherine, or possibly Professor Timothy Garton-Ash. Very, very interesting. I think it takes on question of information and cultural knowledge of what the institutions of the European Union that we've been exposed to for 43 years are continuing to achieve for us. A question really about public education. Was that kind of briefing that, Catherine, you just gave us? Could you give any kind of idea about would that kind of briefing be necessary to inform a populace of Portugal or Poland or Greece to the same degree that you've been informing us? And I'd like to riff that into something about the media as to what you feel has been the effect of the British media over the last 43 years, both national broadcasters, I mean, there's a popular myth that there has been never been a pro-European Union MEP on Question Time, for example, in all the years of its broadcasting. That's a myth. Knock it down. I'd just like to hear some thoughts around levels of public information.
Thank you. Two very good questions. One more question, then, and then we'll hand over to the panel. So whose hand was up first? I think possibly near the back. Is that right? Call for a lady to ask a question.
Thank you. It was very interesting. I just wanted to ask, bearing in mind one of the reasons stated that we decided to leave Europe was our wish to take back control, could the EU have done anything, bearing in mind the rest of Europe feels to some degree similar? Do you think the EU could have done anything itself to have modernised and reflected the way people are feeling at the moment?
So three very good questions. But the hand over to Timothy first of all.
We don't have a word for being stripped of your citizenship, to the lady who was talking about being an EU citizen. Many European languages do have a word. Germany has a word, Ausbürgerung, being stripped of your citizenship. But all of us, if Brexit happens, will be stripped of our European citizenship against our will. And there's a problem here. Maybe Catherine would like to say something about it, which is, I'm afraid, an example of the EU promising more than it delivered. Because we were told from the Maastricht Treaty on that we were European citizens. This was a true citizenship. But it wasn't anything of the kind, because it wasn't actually individual and personal to us. It was purely derivative from your belonging to the citizenship of the member state. So I think it illustrates a problem with the construction of the EU. On the public education point, many of you will know that after the referendum, the most Googled, the Brexit Party is in the PA system, I can see. But the most Googled question was, what is the EU? Which rather indicates a level of knowledge. I think the combination of two things in many ways determined the outcome of the Brexit referendum. Bad history built upon by bad journalism. So we had a very superficial history schooling about the EU, which is very much an our island story mode, very old-fashioned history. And then year upon year, week upon week, the Eurosceptic press built upon that that bad history to develop a Eurosceptic narrative. And the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford did a study on the press during the European referendum that showed if you take title plus circulation, 80% of the press, 80% was Eurosceptic. And what is more, it set the news agenda. The Daily Mail set the agenda for the whole broadcast news cycle. So that's a big, big problem which we woke up too late. I'll leave the take back control question to Catherine.
The issue on citizenship. We were here this week with Sophie in the Veld, the Dutch MEP. Many of you might have seen her. She's very popular on the BBC. She was here. Sylvia Guillaume, who is a French MEP, again, and Claude Moret, who is a Labour MEP from London. We work cross-party on this citizenship issue. Right at the very start, right after the referendum, when we had some meetings in the Parliament, we had a hearing, and I said to Guy Verhofstadt, who is our chief negotiator for Parliament on Brexit negotiations, we have to have a standalone agreement. And he laughed. He said, no, that won't be necessary. And a few weeks ago, he said in the plenary, actually, what we need, if we're looking at a no-deal Brexit, we must have a standalone agreement. Pointed out to him that it was something I've been calling for. But it is shocking the way that European citizens have been used as bargaining chips, and the MEPs, because we are the representatives of the citizens of the European Union, we will, I hope, continue to do that, because the governments of the 27 are not that interested. They're much more interested in trade, which is shocking, I know. I think this issue of citizenship, I think the Brits have always relished being subjects. And that's, for the younger generation, I mean, it leaves us sort of a bit, well, certainly leaves me, but certainly younger than me, somewhat bewildered that we're subjects. But it seems to me that we don't mind being subjects, but we're very nervous about being citizens, and I've never quite understood it. When it comes to the education of the public, we are all guilty of not seeing good things in front of us. You can drive around the M25, and it is a road that is easy to drive on, and it is, you know, unless you go around Heathrow, relatively free moving thousands and thousands of cars a day. You go down the road here and hit a pothole, you will remember that pothole, you don't remember the smooth road. And that is one of the problems with the European Union. You don't know that your food is so much safer. You don't know that the clean water that comes out of your tap, you can travel all around, as Timothy said, even without a passport, around Europe, and you know that the water is drinkable. You know that the clothes that you buy, that anything that is imported into the European Union has to comply with certain standards. They're not good enough, but they're better than they used to be. Electrical goods are safe, and housing is safe, timber is safe. You know, you just name it. Everything that we live with, the benefits from now, from in the 70s, go back to think about the 70s, when your kettle would explode, you know, sometimes, and all sorts of the television. I mean, remember how televisions used to explode? They don't now. We don't even notice that. And that is the difficulty of explaining to people the benefits of the European Union. All they see and they notice are the bad things. And when Farage says there are hundreds of thousands of people coming from Turkey, people go, oh my word, that's awful. But what we don't hear is the good stories and how beneficial that has been. It's human nature, but we've been bad. We do spend a huge amount of money. MEPs are given money to promote the work that they do in their local communities, and we all spend that money. If we had more, can you imagine what the Daily Mail would say about it? The Daily Mail, I should point out, is the largest English language website in the world. Okay, think what they're pumping out on the Daily Mail website. You know, it's beholden to us to talk about the good things, the benefits, and it's much, much harder because, as Churchill pointed out, the lies are halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on. And we have been very, very remiss, and we haven't even thought about which boots we're going to put on.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments which actually sort of link some of the questions. I think the reality of losing our European citizenship really hasn't sunk in, particularly with young people. And the idea that you cannot move and work freely within the region within which you live in, and the fact that half the population of a high-income country voted to take it away, and in particular to take it away from people who wanted to use it, which is increasingly our young people, I fear that that message has not really sunk in to many of our young people. And to a certain extent, they're living in a very virtual social media world, and I'm sometimes quite shocked by even the undergraduates we have in this city who haven't quite understood exactly what that is going to mean. And I think part of the media question has to be linked in to what Timothy said right at the beginning about populism, because if you like, Brexit and Trump emerged at a time before we quite understood about technology and social media, and that is something that is actually part of a much, much bigger issue, but I'm sure it also answers partly your media question. But what I really wanted to really sort of focus on is the fact that our government just has completely sheared away from any discussion on migration. It is a taboo topic. And when I have been working with government and with various departments, I have been really quite shocked we are not allowed to discuss migration. And yet we know that migration from a national level, both culturally and economically, is really, really positive. But we also know that there are local conflicts, and it can be very difficult for some populations, particularly when you have an influx of people who are different from you, and it happens very, very quickly. And I think that is one of the things that we have learned, is that people can absorb people of different nationalities and faiths who look different and talk differently, so long as it's paced. But when it's done very, very quickly, it causes problems. But instead of us being able to debate and discuss this and talk about the good things about being in a multicultural migrant society, I think our government completely and utterly refused to put that on the table. And just given that we are, it seems, shifting away from our regional migrations to our Commonwealth migrants, all the evidence is that whereas our Commonwealth migrants, so the way we think about migration is that people make a contribution economically and they also draw down on benefits. Well, all the evidence that has been, that we have is that whereas our Commonwealth migrants on the whole, they make a very good contribution, but because they're more likely to stay, they tend then to draw down on benefits, particularly pensions, NHS, etc. All the evidence is that our EU migrants have been much more fluid and have overall made a far greater economic contribution to our society and have not drawn down on our benefits. But that has never really been publicly discussed, I think.
Thank you, Sarah. So, another round of 3 questions. So the lady at the front here.
I'm one of those people who puts out cards for young people to get them voting. And one of the things that happened before the EU referendum is young people, 16-year-olds or whatever, say, well, I'm not going to be eligible to vote. And I said, well, okay, if you're not eligible to vote, give yourself a target list of people that you're going to persuade. Because then, even if you don't personally have a vote, you end up getting 10 other people to vote. So you do make an impact. And that's something that we can do. And young people can register to vote at 16, even if they can't vote until 18. And they should, we don't know when we're going to be able to change it. But there were several groups, not just the young people, not just the people from the EU who lived here and paid taxes, who weren't allowed to vote, also the people who Cameron promised were going to get the extension of that 15-year limitation on when they could vote. He promised that was going to be extended, and he reneged on that. So all of those people weren't able to vote.
Was there a question you wanted to ask as well?
Well, I mean, are those things going to be taken into account? And if we had another referendum, would those things be taken into account?
Okay.
It sounded like a gerrymandered vote.
Well, thank you. Just for those, maybe somebody didn't hear, but I think the points were that, first of all, 16 to 18-year-olds are eligible to register to vote, and there are many potential voters who have exceeded the 15-year limit within the European Union, and therefore are not eligible, but that may change. And would this be something that would apply in a future referendum? I think we'll hold that question for a moment and then ask for the next question. So I see a hand up over there, second row behind the gap. Do you want to ask your question?
My question is about the possible consequences if we are forced to endure a soft Brexit. Is it likely that there is going to be any chance of a fast-track rejoining Europe? And secondly, what are the likely implications for the United Kingdom, given that Scotland is likely to have Indie-Ref 2? My point is that faced with Scotland leaving, possibly Northern Ireland leaving, an English, which it would be, an English government might say, oh dear, I think we'll go back into Europe.
Thank you for that. One more question before we hand over to the team. Yes, I think this lady here has had her hand up for a long time. Somebody can... Teacher's voice. Will it carry? Thank you. Very good questions. So who wants to start? Garton?
The target group, it's a really good point to pick your people. If you're speaking to young people, get them to contact their families. But in the Irish referendum on gay marriage, they had quite a campaign to get young people to contact their grandparents and the older generation and get them. And they said, it's not about you, it's about our future. And that's a really good message to send. The other one I wanted to reply to was, there is no such thing as a soft Brexit. Brexit is Brexit, and it will hugely damage this country. Any sort of Brexit. So there's no such a... Just stop people when they say soft Brexit. There is no such thing as a soft Brexit. As to whether if we in this room all fail and we do leave, to rejoin we have to comply with what is known as the Copenhagen criteria. It's a whole list of things that everybody has to do. Clearly we could fast track a lot. We don't have the death penalty yet. Hopefully, you know, and all of those sorts of things. Look how hard it's been for Turkey, and they've now even gone backwards, and they're now have lost their status as an applicant country. It is a long, difficult list, and if we have diverged, as we would do, even a few years away from the European standards, we would find it tricky. But we would then have to do the full compliance procedure to go back in. I think if we leave, it'll be about 5 years before we put in the application, can we come back? And I also think, like you, that if we do, the United Kingdom it will be threatened, and it will be England on its own. I'm not wedded to a country being a certain state as it is now. I'm much more happy with Europe of regions. So for me, it wouldn't be the end of the world if the United Kingdom ceased to be the United Kingdom and Scotland went on its own island, rejoined the Republic. It is down to those people who live there to make decisions about their own futures. And I think that is why I think we would very rapidly be putting up our hand and say, excuse me, we made a mistake, can we come back in again?
For once, we're going to have some disagreement on this panel, because I think that's actually terribly optimistic. I really don't think, and I think it's a really important point, I don't think Remainers suddenly become rejoiners and we're back in 5 to 10 years. Let me tell you why. First of all, English are pretty bloody-minded people, Catholic people. They've been sold a pack of lies for a long time. It'll take quite a long time before people are ready to acknowledge human nature being what it is, and English nature perhaps in particular, that we made this mistake. Given that, I don't think it will be disaster tomorrow. I think that results will be very negative, but I think those negative results will be relatively gradual over a number of years. Number two, the Eurosceptic press, which we already talked about, will say, well, it wasn't our fault. It's the bloody Europeans. They gave us such a lousy deal. Blame it on the French, which the English have been doing for 700 years. It was the French, it was the Belgians, it was the Europeans who did it to us. And believe me, that story will have traction. So there will be resentment and negative emotion from both sides, which is already there. Thirdly, we at the moment have our cake and eat it. We at the moment have that extraordinary special deal when we're not in the bits of the EU we don't like Schengen or the Eurozone, but we're in all the bits that we do like. None of that will be on offer again. It will be off-the-shelf standard membership, sign up to the Eurozone, Schengen and the rest. So as an offer, it will be much less attractive. Fourthly, we will have to seek some alternative business model for this country. Even if it was only in the 5 to 10 year timescale, so we would have diverged some more. Fifth, in the meantime, one of two things would have happened the other side of the channel. Either Macron would have had his way, and led by the Franco-German couple, the European Union would really have got its act together, in which case they would have gone further ahead in ways that are not particularly attractive to the British, i.e. what happened to us in the 1960s happens again while we're out, so that it becomes even more difficult to make the case. Or, and this is a really serious point, the disintegrative impact of Brexit, along with all the other crises I have talked about, and lots of other parts of Europe in a big mess. Think of Italy, for example. Think of Poland and Hungary. Without us, that actually it would be the beginning of the end of the European Union, and there wouldn't be much of a European Union to go back to. So I don't think we should have any illusion. This is it. This is make or break time. If we're out, we're out, I'm afraid, and that's why we have to stay in.
I just wanted to add, actually, something that Timothy has now brought up, is that we haven't really considered the impact on Europe. And I've been working, going backwards and forwards on the Eurostar, which has been remarkably easy till recently, to the Sorbonne. And I have to say, among many of the French that I know, they are really, really worried about Brexit and what it is going to do to Europe. And I think if we look demographically, the fact that, of course, not looking at this audience, but generally it was the older adults that tended to vote leave and the younger adults that remain, and we are dramatically shifting that demography, and we will increasingly have a younger population that wishes to remain, and a Europe that may be far, far more damaged than probably we realise. The outcome of Brexit in 10, 15 years' time could actually be very, very different from the one we're thinking about at the moment.
Thank you, Sarah. So we move on to the next section of the meeting, which is actually contributions from the floor. And the first two contributions, we've asked people to speak for 2 minutes. First is Anne Black, followed by Rosa Ashby. Anne is over here, I think. Could you stand up, Anne? And then after Rosa will come Lizzie. So Anne is a Unison Trade Union representative at Oxford Brookes University and is an active member of the Labour Party and would like to say a few words.
Okay, I should make it absolutely clear that I'm no longer a member of the Labour Party NEC, so I'm just a humble foot soldier along with every other party member. So I was a union representative for 30 years, and for all that time, most of the protection which working people enjoy came from the European Union. That was true through 18 years of Conservative government, where Europe brought into parental leave, equal rights for part-time workers, action against discrimination, protecting pay and conditions when jobs were outsourced. John Major opted out of the social chapter in the Maastricht Treaty in the hope that all this stuff would come to an end. But the Working Time Directive actually came in through as a health and safety issue around work-life balance, and that gave people a minimum of 4 weeks paid leave a year. It gave them a maximum 48 hours working week, although people could volunteer to opt out of that, and it also gave them rest breaks after a certain number of hours at work. However, campaigning didn't end with the election of a Labour government in 1997, and Tony Blair also needed a lot of work. He wanted to preserve the opt-out of the 48-hour maximum working week, and it was Labour MEPs who voted with Social Democrat MEPs in Europe against the Labour government in this country. It took 8 years for the unions to negotiate that the 8 bank holidays a year should be in addition to the 4 weeks paid leave, rather than included within them. But all these things started in Europe, and the pattern for all governments was that any progressive change, first they resisted it, then they reluctantly conceded it, and then finally they claimed credit for it. And so all these rights were backed up by the right of appeal to the European Court of Justice, which wasn't a plot to suppress us. It was a way of ensuring that workers' pay and conditions in this country could not be undercut by lower pay and conditions applied to workers from elsewhere. And that's absolutely fundamental to the future. Without it, we risk a race to the bottom, where the people who are worst off are likely to see their pay and conditions deteriorate further because they will not have that floor under them, and they will also see their jobs at risk from people from poorer European countries who are willing to work for less and put up with more. And the people at the bottom, as always, will lose most, and we will not realise the effect of losing that framework until it's too late. As Joni Mitchell said, they won't know what they've got till it's gone.
You've made so many really good points there. I've been hesitant about interrupting you at 2 minutes, but thank you for that. Our next speaker is Rosa Ashby, who's a very loyal supporter who's been a businesswoman in Whitney and comes from Northern Ireland. Let's see a few words about Northern Ireland.
Hello everybody. Some people know me. As you can guess, I'm from Northern Ireland. I was born, I was brought up there and lived as a social worker. I want to give you a little glimpse of what life was like and why the Good Friday Agreement is so important. It must never go. It must be kept at all costs. Life as a social worker is full of never know where the next bomb, never knew what was going to happen next shooting. I worked at one point with blind children, and one Saturday they said, "Can you take us swimming?" So I said, okay. So I got 14 of them into the minibus and off we went to Belfast. They had a good swim. The one thing I'm very bad at is directions. So on our way back, I realised I was on the wrong road. That was important in Northern Ireland in those days. So I could hear shooting. The children thought it was fireworks. I knew it was no fireworks. I was on my own, by the way, 14 blind children. So suddenly the army stopped and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "The reverse gear has gone in the bus. I can't reverse. I can't turn. The road is full of vehicles. What am I going to do?" He mumbled something like, "Women drivers." So I said, "Okay, you get in." So he got in. "The reverse gear's gone." I said, "Yes, I know. What am I going to do?" He said, "Well, you can't go any further." So he fortunately escorted me around the school and we came out the other side. Whew. On another occasion, still in the blind school, one Sunday evening, it was my turn to be there on a Sunday evening. There was a knock on the door. It was early evening, the children had not returned after being at home for the weekend. I opened the door. A man was standing there and he said, "What time is the minibus due back with the children?" I knew, but I wasn't going to tell him. I said, "Why?" He said, "I want to know." No, I said, "Why?" He said he pulled a gun out of his pocket and he said, "Because the driver is going to get this." So I thought, oh boy. So I tried to find out where the driver, who happened to be a voluntary person working with the British Army at that point, he volunteered to do this job. I ran around all the homes where the children were living and I said, I found out where the next pickup was. I said, "Do never allow that driver back to school in Belfast ever again. He must not come back under any circumstances. Get someone else. I never saw that man again, but at least I saved his life. These were normal occurrences in Northern Ireland. Shootings, bombings. My father's business was bombed in December of 1971. He died 2 months later of a heart attack. On one occasion I was working in a children's home. I was working with kids in care. It was Christmas Eve. I had worked all day Christmas Eve, so I'd taken the evening off. 10 o'clock at night, I got a phone call. 3 of the girls had gone out for the day and had not returned. What do you want us to do? I said, have you phoned the police? They don't want to go into that area. Right. I'll go in. So I said to my husband, Jim, I said, we are going in to get those girls out. We went through the army block. They were not coming in. We got to the door, knocked on the door. It was a good night to go in, actually, because everybody was drunk. The girls came out like little lambs. The police had given me half an hour to get in and get out. My remark was, what happens if I don't come out in half an hour? Don't worry, we'll come and scrape you up. I got back, and the children were so thankful. None of us spoke. We got back, the army waved, you're through. And I said, yes. Well, these were everyday occurrences. This is why the Good Friday Agreement is so important to be kept at all costs. It must never go away and must always be kept. And I really hope something happens to keep that Good Friday Agreement. Thank you.
Very presentation. Once again, I hesitated to interrupt because I know that what you said with great passion, and I think we're all very moved by it. I'm going to ask the remaining speakers to try to keep within 2 minutes if at all possible. So our next speaker is going to be Liz Eden, who is going to talk to us about the Erasmus programme, of which she is the programme officer at Oxford University.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I will do my best to keep this brief. It's my pleasure to be here this evening, such a distinguished company, to reinforce the message from the University of Oxford that we are strongly advocating for a continued participation in the Erasmus Plus programme. We are and we will remain a truly global institution. Sarah kindly shared some national statistics on the Erasmus Plus programme earlier this evening. Just to contextualise that in Oxford, my team enables approximately 300 students each year to engage in this programme through traineeships, internships, work experience and study exchange opportunities. This is done both as an element of a compulsory element of their curriculum, but also as an enrichment to their curriculum. And in return, we receive approximately 50 incomers on formal exchange placements and many more undertaking traineeships throughout the university. These incoming students help enrich our academic community enormously. And it's very clear from the feedback that we receive from our participants how valued this programme is, and it will be a tremendous shame if we lost that. I'll wrap up because my time is short. It's been said earlier, there's been a lot of discussion about the role that young people have to play. I would just like to finish by saying how important the Erasmus programme is for training and developing our young people as global citizens.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to say that we are a collaborative venture. This evening's meeting is supported not only by Oxford for Europe, but also by the European Movement and also by the Oxford European Association and New Europeans, of which you'll see the banners in front of you. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Uwe Ziegler, who would like to say a few words about those organisations.
Right, thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for the great panel. So yes, I have the great privilege of chairing two of those organizations that are co-sponsoring this evening, one local, one pan-European. The Oxford European Association was established by Oxford City Council on a cross-party basis in July 2016, very nearly after the referendum, with the explicit aim of saying that Oxford remains a European and open and tolerant and inclusive city. And what we do is we champion EU27 citizens' rights. We organize meetings to inform. We just had one last week about settled status and other issues. We had several meetings, again cross-party, with different MEPs. And we have social events, picnics, Europe Day, which is celebrated next week on the 9th of May. We'll have the European Union flag flying above Oxford Town Hall. So please do, if you live in and around Oxford, please do join us. The second organisation, as Peter has mentioned, is a pan-European organisation called New Europeans, indeed, established in 2012 to champion the rights of those mobile EU citizens, like Alexandrine, people who have exercised their EU citizens' treaty rights and have moved to another EU member state and are a silent minority, as we saw in the referendum. And it is an organisation that now has branches all across the continent and is fighting precisely for the sorts of issues that Timothy was also mentioning, for making EU citizenship meaningful, for making that concept one that citizens across this continent, 508 million of them, feel proud to hold and feel has a value in addition to and not replacing their national citizenship. So again, I welcome anyone who wishes to join those organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. So thank you. To those of you, and I know there are many who are going to ask questions, hopefully we'll have a chance to ask them informally later on at the end of the meeting, but unfortunately we need to draw a meeting to a conclusion at past. So that leaves us 4 segments of 2 minutes each. And the first one is going to be Annette Shaw, who's one of our loyal members, who will say something about what it's like being a European living in Oxford. And then I'm going to ask the speakers each to give us 2 minutes to sum up. Annette.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, my name is Annette Shaw. I'm talking to you about the benefits of freedom of movement. In 1981, I came to the UK from Germany as an au pair, living, working in Britain and studying English. Subsequently, I built my life in this country, which was made easy by being able to move freely across Europe. I met and made friends with other people from France, Germany, Switzerland, Scandinavia, from outside the EU, and people from Britain. I lived in London and I found it was a city who welcomed everyone no matter where they came from. I fell in love with an Englishman and we married. Well, we're not together now, but we still send each other Christmas cards. I've made my home here in the UK. I now live in Oxford. I have met people from all over the world, including the EU, and we're all great friends. I have worked in various organisations, both in the private and public sector, as a senior administrator. Most recently, I have trained as a life coach, and I intend to set up a life coaching practice here in the UK. I could set up my business elsewhere in Europe if I chose to do so. Well, that's the beauty of free movement, or freedom of movement. It is wonderful that as EU citizens we can live, work, run our businesses across Europe, the European continent. Our professional qualifications are recognised across the EU. We can fall in love, marry, make friends wherever we choose to make our home in Europe. So what's not to like? As for me personally, I living in the United Kingdom, and I've got my friends in Germany. We visit each other, and my friends, they love to come here. They love to go and see the sights of London and visit the East Coast. It's so easy to jump on a plane to Hamburg as well, stay with my friends there, or with my family in southern Germany, and it's pretty cheap as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing my friends in Hamburg in the summer. And since we're on the subject of EU citizens and their rights, I would like to mention an organisation called the 3 Million. I think they've been mentioned here a few times now. They have worked and campaigned tirelessly on behalf of the 3 million EU citizens living and working in the UK, making sure that EU citizens continue to be protected should Brexit happen. Well, fingers crossed we can stop it. They also have an Oxford branch. You can find them online and they have a Facebook page. Please support them so that they continue working on your behalf to protect your rights. And I want to finish by saying that freedom of movement is something very precious. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Annette, and long may it last. I've been chastised by Catherine for saying that Annette was a European living in Oxford. We're all Europeans living in Oxford. So I'll wash my mouth out with soap. So that brings us to near the end of the meeting, and I'd just like to ask each of the panelists in turn to say a couple of words by way of conclusion. Timothy.
First of all, I think we should make Peter Burke President of the European Council, because he's a formidable champ. Give him a round of applause. I've now used 20 seconds of my time as martinet for timekeeping. So the most famous poem in the Polish language, Pan Tadeusz, begins, Lithuania, thou art like health. How much we should value you, he alone knows who has lost you. So he's saying, I've lost Lithuania, it's like losing your health. And I think it's like that with Europe and with membership of the European Union. And we are like Adam Mickiewicz, the poet of Pan Tadeusz, we're in that situation where we're just beginning to wake up to how much we risk losing. I've been at all the three big people's vote marches in London, the relatively small first one, bigger and yet bigger. I have nowhere in all my 40 years of travelling across Europe seen a bigger pro-European demonstration than we had in London in March. And that's an amazing fact. The next closest thing was the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine, which was a sea of European flags. So it's the country which is just outside and really wants to get in, and the country which is inside but is just about to come out, where we really mobilize. But we haven't lost our health yet. There's still a chance of curing ourselves, but the chances are still not big. I think we have to be quite realistic about that. They're going up, but the chances are still against getting the second referendum and actually then getting that vote to stay in. So every single vote, every single canvasser in the European elections, every single pair of shoes on the pavement really counts. And so I really appreciate what you're all doing here in Oxford for Europe. Thank you. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for being here.
This for me has been fantastic because I came as an academic with lots of evidence, but I've learned a tremendous amount. So thank you. The three simple points I want to make is that I think at the moment when we think of Brexit, we tend to think of the economic damage it's going to do, and I think we tend to neglect the social, long-term social damage it will do. Not just that we will lose so many wonderful European citizens that are from our country, but also as we move, and it won't just be division between Leave and Remain, there also, I think, will be huge intergenerational conflict. And I say this because I sit on the House, or I've just been sitting on the House of Lords Intergenerational Fairness Committee. They got a lot of press because they talked about getting rid of the BBC licences for the over 75s, which I do not support. It wasn't me. But one of the things that came up there was the impact of Brexit on intergenerational feeling, and that a lot of young people, probably wrongly, will really resent older adults. And I think the divisions in our society socially could probably be quite deep. And I want to go back to what I said about the fact that in Britain we have been very fortunate to have this wonderful balance between our Commonwealth and our region. I was in Paris on April the 15th, which may not mean much to you till I say I walked along the Seine, looked up, saw some smoke, and then watched Notre Dame burn along with a variety of Parisians and others. And what was really interesting for me that came out of some of the discussions after that was the fact that actually Notre Dame is also an English cathedral. 2 of our kings were crowned there. Mary, Queen of Scots, was married there. Charles I was married there. And I think that if we can get a confirmatory people's vote, then we could be very positive, because I think one of the things we can say is that we will have an amazing platform here in Britain to really engage with Europe, to support and rebuild and change Europe, and maybe when we're all very depressed in the morning, that is something that we should clutch onto. So thank you.
I would like also to add my thanks to the organisers, all of the groups. What a tremendous evening it's been, and thank you for turning out tonight. And don't we love those hats with the stars around? Inspired, I think, in no small part by the Queen's hat when she opened Parliament, which they've forgotten to do. They just rolled over Parliament again. There is another group that I work with in the European Parliament, and that's called Remain in Spain. It's Brits living in Spain and elsewhere, and I think they should get a mention because they've been doing terrific work. What we lose, we've heard tonight all sorts of things, from protections to our standards, managing to stop the donkey meat scandal, you'll remember that, Volkswagen, and air quality that we all breathe, that we are setting targets for that, safety standards. Just one point I wanted to come back to, that we spoke earlier about how Brexit has stopped the Brexit, the Frexit, all the other countries, but what you're seeing is the far right is still there. They may not be saying they want to leave the European Union, but they are now turning their fire on women's rights, reproductive rights, gay rights, the human rights that the European Union has stood for and defended and battled to get done. And you know, democracy is so very fragile. We get used to it. We think it's safe, and it isn't. And I think we all have to look to that right-wing element that is working very hard to undermine our democracies right across the European Union. European Union is all about people. And that is something, we have a group of us tonight here, and those rights are what we must defend. You know, the Brexiteers, they said it would be easy to leave the European Union. They lied to us. And we have to keep holding them to account. Don't just run away from the Farages that we meet, the little Farages that we meet in the streets and on the doorsteps. Challenge them. What do you think the UK is going to be like outside the European Union? They don't have a plan. Mrs May has cobbled together a half-baked plan. David Davis has got a plan, IDS, Rees-Moggs, they don't have a real plan. Challenge them and hold them to account. Because the lies, the overspending, the corruption in the electoral process is something that we risk losing at our peril. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear from our other speakers too. And I wish you all a safe journey home. Thanks.
I would love to leave the last word to Catherine, because it was so articulate and so heartfelt. I will, however, give the last word to another politician. I think some of my colleagues may wince when I do so. But before I do, just to remind you, please stand up, and you go over to our stand there, you get details about how to do so and how to keep in touch with us. And I want to thank you all for coming and to thank my colleagues for all the hard work they put into organising this event. Final word, it is purely common sense to belong to a community working in peace on economic and political issues that concern us all. Who said that? Margaret Thatcher. So, put that to your friends. Thank you all for coming. Good night.